My name is John Lobell. I teach architecture at Pratt Institute. I do most of my blogging at creativitydiscourse.com, and I review movies at cinemadiscourse.com, where we look at movies from a mythological point of view. And you can reach me at johnlobell@mac.com. And today we're going to talk about Joseph Campbell's approach to myths as we see them in movies and in ourselves. So, in outline, we'll look very briefly at Joseph Campbell's approach to myths, and more specifically at what he describes as the hero journey, and within that, the Percival Myth, and a variant of that, the American detective story, then some Clint Eastwood movies, and then introduce a notion called the Second Renaissance. So Campbell was born in 1904, died in 1987, and even if we're not aware of him, he's a major figure whose work permeates our lives. We see his influence through his very famous television interviews with Bill Moyers, his lectures, which are available online now, movies. He was very influential on many movies, and we're going to look at a couple of in particular. Some influence in academia, very influential in the New Consciousness movement, and mostly through his fantastic books, which we should all be regularly reading and rereading. By mythology, Campbell means not just the Greek myths or the Norse myths, but all of culture. And Campbell sees myth as a metaphoric language that addresses our personal, spiritual, cultural, and cosmological existence. And Campbell says, myth is the secret opening through which the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos pour into human cultural manifestation. One of my favorite Campbell quotes is, "The latest incarnation of Oedipus, the continued romance of Beauty and the Beast, stands this afternoon on the corner of 42nd Street and 5th Avenue waiting for the traffic light to change." So I chose this image from the 40s because Campbell wrote Hero with a Thousand Faces in 1949. And this quote shows that Campbell sees myths as alive in our lives and not just stories from the past. So we want to look in particular at what Campbell calls the hero journey, and he presents this in his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And this is a pattern, this hero journey is a pattern in myths, religions, fairy tales, novels, individual mystic experiences, in which the hero is called to the quest and goes through a series of stages. So Campbell uses hundreds of different stories, religions, myths, fairy tales as examples in the book, but we could just pick the Odyssey. And so we begin with a call to adventure. Odysseus sets sail for home from Troy, separation from ordinary reality. Odysseus is blown off course and goes to the land of the Lotus Eaters. We're going into another realm. He enters a realm of fabulous forces and survives a succession of trials. He encounters the Cyclops, the Sirens, etc., etc., wins decisive victories, slays the Cyclops, resists the Sirens, and finally slays the suitors. Returns to enrich the world. Odysseus and Penelope are reunited. And we'll see an example, but we can think of hundreds of stories in which this is the pattern. Today, our myths are most likely to be carried in our movies. So let's look at Star Wars. The first one, now known as Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. And the movie begins with ordinary reality. So Luke Skywalker is on the farm with his foster parents, but dreams of something else. You see him dreamily looking into space. And then the call to adventure. One of the robots that he buys, R2-D2, is carrying a message and projects a hologram of Princess Leia. Obi-Wan, help me, Obi-Wan. And Luke thinks, could that be old Ben? And he goes out and finds old Ben, who's Obi-Wan Kenobi, great Jedi warrior. And Luke now finds out more and more about his heritage. He gets his laser saber, and then at the bar, which is a threshold for strange creatures, takes off to another realm. And here he is on the Millennium Falcon with Han Solo and Obi-Wan, zoom. And he's off to a realm of fabulous forces, space adventures, and he's going to encounter all these difficulties, including Darth Vader, about whom we'll find out more. And here he is, disguised as a trooper, hasn't yet taken off his mask, encountering the prisoner Princess Leia. And what's the relationship between these two? Right, they're twins. And one of Campbell's first works was an introduction to Maud Oakes, where the twins went in search of their father, a Navajo myth. And who's their father? Right, Darth Vader. So this is going to get very rich and complicated as we fold out through 6 movies. In the end, we're having the final confrontation. Luke is in his fighter with his techie equipment, and Obi-Wan Kenobi's voice comes, "Use the Force, Luke. Use the Force." He puts away his technology on instinct, fires his photon torpedoes, blows the Death Star to bits, and has everybody's joyous, has won the decisive victory, returned to enrich the world, aiding the just cause of the rebels. Now, this is all very well understood. There are entire television shows presenting an analysis of the mythic structures of Star Wars, and with very important scholars describing how this works. But one of the famous depictions of this is in Christopher Vogler's book, The Writer's Journey. This began as a 7-page memo that he wrote when he was at Disney, called A Practical Guide to the Hero with 1,000 Faces. Now, of course, you can't expect movie executives to read a book that's a few hundred pages, so we need a 7-page summary. And Vogler famously says, all stories consist of a few common structural elements found universally in myths, fairy tales, dreams, and movies. And so here we have this structure outlined, sort of summarizing Campbell's approach for how we might apply it to movies. And this is one of the 2 books that all screenwriters are supposed to have read along with story. Now, let's focus in a little bit more. One of Campbell's areas of interest is Arthurian romance, stories of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. And a quote from one of them that Campbell translated, the knights are gathered at the Round Table, and the Holy Grail appears before them veiled. Now, the Holy Grail is the thing you're seeking. Lots of versions of exactly what it is, but it's the thing you're seeking. So one of the knights says, I propose that we take a vow to view the Grail unveiled before we eat this supper. They agree and set forth. Campbell translates, they thought it would be a disgrace to go forth in a group. So each entered the forest at a point he himself chose, where it was darkest and there was no path or way. And here in these Arthurian romances, we have the moral structure of Western culture. These are the patterns that we live out in the West. And the notion is that we act individually, not as a group, and that the inner moral voice is not in the society, but in the heart of each individual. So let's see this notion in the Percival myth. And Percival, his story is that he's born to a single mom. His father died in combat before he was born. He had been a knight. And his mother raises him to have no knowledge of knighthood. She doesn't want to lose her son, as well as having lost her lover or husband. But one day, Percival's out playing in the woods, and some knights in shining armor with flowing plumes on great chargers go crashing through the forest. Percival sees this, runs home to his mother and says, I'm going to become a knight. And she's heartbroken, but dresses him in burlap, puts him on a donkey, hoping he'll be laughed out of King Arthur's court, and she dies of a broken heart as he leaves. Sure enough, he's innocent of the ways of knights, but he becomes invincible because of his purity of heart. You might recall what Lancelot's doing. So Percival doesn't have that problem. In one of his adventures, he enters the castle of the Fisher King, who had been wounded in a hunting accident in the groin, and his wound will not heal. And as a result of his illness, the vitality of the king is dependent on the king, and the kingdom has become a wasteland. So we're in the wasteland now. And Percival arrives at the castle and is moved to ask, what ails you? But then realizes a knight is not supposed to speak to a king until spoken to first. So for the first time, he has acted out of the rules of society rather than his own inner motivation, and he has failed the quest. He's turned away from the castle and wanders for years. And during those wanderings, he comes to love Conduir, her name evoking guide. Now, Campbell distinguishes between three kinds of loves: eros as cardinal love, agape is spiritual love, but amor is love for another individual person, which is a uniquely Western idea. So eros is the motivation of the sex organs for each other. Agape is spiritual love, universal, you love everyone. But amor is for you recognize another individual human being for who they are and come to love them. In this new kind of relationship, Percival again finds the castle, asks the king what ails you, succeeds in his mission, heals the king, and restores the land. Now, let's look at America's favorite novel, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And in there, Huck is helping Jim escape. And Huck knows he's doing something terrible. He's stealing property. He is breaking the commandment of God. He's listened to the preacher preach that you must not do this. And aware that what he's doing is terrible, he finally says, I know it's wrong. I No, I'll go to hell. All right then, I'll go to hell. Them was terrible words, but them was said. Now we know that Huck is acting boldly out of an inner moral vision and is taking the correct course of action coming from his own inner vision as opposed to society's rules. Now, this Percival Myth is very directly translated into Robert Redford's movie The Natural. We're not going to look at that, but next time you look at that movie again, think of the story of Percival, and the pattern is exactly there. But we're going to look at something else, the American detective story. And in an essay distinguishing between the American detective story and the English amateur detective, the mystery writer Raymond Chandler writes, "Down these mean streets a man must go, who is not himself mean, who is neither tarnished nor afraid. The detective must be a complete man and a common man, and yet an unusual man. He must be, to use a rather weathered phrase, a man of honor." So now we have the detective, the hero, the cowboy, acting out of his own inner moral sense of right and wrong, resisting the rules of society where they're wrong, and then 1,000 movies. This is John Wayne in Stagecoach. This is Humphrey Bogart in The Maltese Falcon. Shane. Riddick. Matt Damon in The Bourne Identity. And even now, female versions with Angelina Jolie in Salt. Now let's focus specifically on some Clint Eastwood movies. There are hundreds and hundreds of examples of this. So let's just get a little bit focused. And for the past maybe 30 years, Clint Eastwood has represented a certain kind of masculinity and has replaced earlier movie heroes such as John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, Gary Cooper, and very briefly he sort of comes to wide recognition in Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns as the man with no name in this trilogy, Fistful of Dollars for a Few Dollars More, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And here we have these nihilistic characters who are after the gold, and then his next series is the Dirty Harry movies. And here he's Harry Callahan, San Francisco police detective, who is angry about the injustice of the system and it's not being supportive of the weak and downtrodden, and makes up the distance with his .44 Magnum. But now let's look at something maybe a bit more sophisticated. 1993, he does the movie In the Line of Fire, where he plays Secret Service agent Frank Horrigan, and he's going to be up against John Malkovich as Mitch Leary, who's the bad guy. We're going to find out there's something interesting about this bad guy, and his interaction is going to be with Rene Russo, who is Lily Raines. So in the Line of Fire, our hero here, Harry Callahan, is the only Secret Service agent still working who's ever lost a president. He was on the bumper of Kennedy's car, failed to jump to take the second bullet, and is now in the wasteland working counterfeiting. In their investigations, he and his partner come across something strange. There's an apartment, it's been abandoned, they go in, and there's all these clippings that are very suspicious. There's maybe a potential assassin afoot. And then this potential assassin, played by John Malkovich, telephones him, and they're now in touch. And so he's put back on presidential detail because he's in touch with the potential assassin. But now there are women in the Secret Service, and he's a real misogynist and doesn't believe women belong there. So here we have Lily. He's back on presidential detail. A little bit stressful for him as he's getting older, having to keep pace with the president's car. And he's got this bantering relationship going with Lily that's beginning to maybe work into something. Well, lots of twists and turns, but the president is arriving for a big fundraiser in Los Angeles. The Secret Service is staking out the hotel. John Malkovich is in disguise here, being a former CIA assassin. He's got, he can, defeat any security. Here he is, he's gotten through the metal detectors with a plastic gun and his bullets in his keychain. And he's now loading up. Harry Callahan has figured it out. He yells gun, jumps, takes the bullet. He's wearing a vest. And after a struggle is able to throw John Malkovich's character off the elevator. And they are now recognized for their great work in saving the president. So, in Amour with Lily, Frank gets a second chance, this time takes the bullet and saves the president. Now let's look at a developing idea. We see maybe In the Line of Fire had some kind of what we might call more mythic sophistication than these earlier movies. Robert Thurman, who is an American Buddhist, friend of the Dalai Lama and promoter of Buddhism, refers to something he calls a second Renaissance, in which he envisions the Western understanding and control of the material world being brought together with the Buddhist understanding and control of the mind. So, one of Eastwood's more recent movies is Gran Torino. And here, Eastwood is playing Walt Kowalski, who's a retired automobile worker. His wife has just died. His wife of many years. It must have been a difficult life for her because he's a real sour character. Here he is at her funeral, and here is his family, who he thinks they're all jerks and doesn't get along with any of them. And he's in a neighborhood that is being taken over by gangs, so he has Hmong Cambodian neighbors who are rather nice, but there are a lot of Hmong Cambodians in the area who are not nice. He's good with weapons from his Korean War experience, so he's not putting up with any of this. The police are worthless, but he is going to defend himself. And eventually he warms up to his neighbors. He's a widower now. They invite him in. The food's a little strange, but he gets along with them, and he starts to become a protector of the girl who's living next door when she gets in trouble with gangs, and becomes a protector and mentor to the boy living next door who is kind of drifting. And Walt is good with tools and can get him a job in a tool shop, to instruct him in tools and maybe start getting him some skills. But the gangs aren't going to let this happen. They steal the tools that Walt gave the kid. The girl, they beat up and rape her. So he's going to have to do something about this. Now, you know, Dirty Harry would just go shoot them. But we know that's going to work. There are too many of them. But now our Clint Eastwood character has learned skillful means. And so, in the beginning, we also see him at the doctor's office. So he has lung cancer. And he's not going to live very long, and his death is going to be kind of painful. So there's a strategy here. He takes his old dog, leaves it with the Hmong grandmother. Dog's sad, knows what's coming, goes off to confront the gang members in their gang house, and very provocatively reaches for his cigarette lighter, and they open fire, and they've now murdered him in cold blood in front of a whole bunch of witnesses, so they're all hauled off and the neighborhood is cleaned up. The Hmong come to his funeral along with his family, and they are there at the reading of his will. He's left his family nothing. He's given his house to the church, and he's given his Gran Torino to the Hmong boy along with his tools. And so we have the sense of new life. So this is very depressing. Wachowski was old, he died, but we all die. And the point is life, if life goes on, then we've got a workable situation. Now this of course evokes something. This is a redo of what we saw in Charles Bronson in the Death Wish movies. And in the Charles Bronson character is able to kill the bad guys. Of course, never gets them all, but he can go from city to city cleaning them up quite a few, and then has a drink and can go to bed at night. And we get another version of this in Harry Brown with Michael Caine, which is a truly depressing movie. Just the old men are not that likable. The criminals are horrible. The police are horrible. The public housing projects that everybody live in are horrible. So Harry Brown movies kind of depressing. The Death Wish movies are satisfying, but ultimately, is that the way we want to go? And Gran Torino, we see the Clint Eastwood character acquire skillful means, which is a Buddhist notion for how to resolve the problem. So let's look at one more. And I might be tempted to ask, what will be the new mythology? And Campbell liked to say, one can no more say what will be the new mythology than one could say what will be tonight's dream, as they both come from the same realm. But let's do a little exploration. And we'll look at a movie called Groundhog Day, directed by Harold Ramis, with Bill Murray as Phil Connors and Audie McDowell as Rita. So, Bill Murray is playing a self-centered, obnoxious weatherman in a Pittsburgh station. Here he is waving his arms in front of the blue screen doing the weather. And his new producer is Rita. And they have been assigned to cover Groundhog Day. So here they are off in their little vehicle, off on an adventure. And of course we cross a bridge and we enter into a magical realm of Puxatawney, Pennsylvania. And Rita has arranged for Phil to stay in a beautiful little Victorian bed and breakfast. So here's our magical realm. 6 o'clock in the morning, his clock radio goes off, gets up, drags himself out of bed, and a little bit cynically does his Groundhog Day weatherman's broadcast. And, okay, we're out of here. We're not going to spend one extra day in this crummy little town. and they're off home, but there's a freak storm, and they're not going to make it, and all communications are shut down. And so it's back to the bed and breakfast. Next morning, 6 o'clock, maybe we'll be able to get out of here today. And the radio station saying, "Good morning, everybody. It's Groundhog's Day." He says, "What? Didn't that just happen? This is weird, but I better get down there just in case, I mean, it is only once a year, right?" So he does his broadcast again. It's a little bit off. But then this starts happening every day, day after day. I mean, he gets down there and does his broadcast, but there's something really weird. He finds a doctor. "Maybe I've got a brain tumor." "Nope, no tumors. You look fine. Maybe you should see a psychologist." Goes off to see a psychologist. His specialty is family psychology, so couple counseling. This is not helping. Well, it's beginning to appear I can get away with anything. And he's with his drinking buddies. He says, "I'm not going to live by their rules anymore." Takes out a mailbox. But if we want to have fun, we need to be able to finance this. Now, here's the thing. Every day he wakes up, he's going to go through that day. Everybody else, it's the first time, it's that day. It's Tuesday, Groundhog Day. It's the first time it's happened. But for him, it's happened again and again and again. So he can sort of set things up for what he's going to do that day. So first thing you want to do is first thing in the morning is stock up on money. And he figures out where he can walk off with a bag of money from the bank truck, and he can eat all the pastries he wants. There's not going to be any blood sugar crash the next day, because there isn't any next day. He can pick up girls. One day he asks her name and what school she went to. Next day he says, still the first day for her, but for him, "Oh, weren't we in the 6th grade together?" He can role play. Here he is as Clint Eastwood going to a spaghetti western movie. And his broadcasts are getting more and more cynical, and Rita is not pleased. This is not, what they're supposed to be doing. Eventually, this is getting wearing. I mean, it goes on. People have tried to calculate from what happens in the movie, and it is years of Tuesdays that he lives through. Well, he smashes his clock radio. He jumps out of buildings to commit suicide. He drives a truck off a cliff. The old dropping the plugged-in toaster in the bathtub trick. Doesn't work every day. The next day he just wakes up and it's Groundhog Day. Now, lots of twists and turns in the plot, but eventually he says, what if I were to use this opportunity of these repeated days, not just to take advantage of people, but to become a decent person? He's also a little bit interested in Rita, and we go through some superficial courting of her, which don't work, but eventually he starts taking on the right attitudes. He teaches himself French Romantic poetry. He learns to play the piano. And he has been able to figure out every bad thing that happens in this town during the day. A kid falls out of a tree. Well, he'll be there. But there's one that he can't. There's an old man he encounters in the morning on the way to do his broadcast who's homeless, and he eventually dismisses him at first, eventually gives him money, and that night the old man dies. Well, this is not going to happen. We now take care of the old man. He only has one day. We get him a lot of food, but it doesn't work. He can't do anything about the old man. He dies no matter what he does. Well, his broadcast now becomes quite profound. He becomes a decent human being. There's this rich wisdom in it. Everybody's so impressed. Rita, Phil, I didn't know you were such a philosopher. He's also a party animal that night. He's the hit of the party. Everybody has a great time. He's playing jazz piano. He really hits it off with Rita. There's always been maybe this potential of some chemistry between them. And yep, they end up in bed. And the next morning, it's finally tomorrow. He's broken the cycle, and he declares, let's get married and let's live here. Now, this movie did well. It came out, got good box office, good reviews by the critics, but it's now recognized as one of the great movies. And that sometimes takes time. People have to think about it. Harold Ramis states that he's people started contacting him about it. At first I would get mail saying, oh, you must be a Christian because the movie is so beautifully expresses Christian belief. Then rabbis started calling, and then the Buddhists. Well, I knew they loved it because my mother-in-law has lived in a meditation center for 30 years. Now, where's this idea come from? There are examples of this. Friedrich Nietzsche writes, what if someday or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliness and say to you, this life, as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more. Okay, you're going to have to live this life over and over. What would you do? Would you throw yourself down and gash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or have you once experienced the tremendous moment when you would have answered him, you are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine? Nietzsche's point is, if this demon were to come to you and say you're going to live this life over and over, you should joyously say, fantastic. And if not, change the way you're living your life. And very famously in his Stanford commencement address, Steve Jobs said something similar. I have looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I'm about to do today? Whenever the answer has been no, for too many days in a row, I know I need to change something. And finally, Roger Ebert, who writes that his estimation of the film has been growing and moving up in his list, writes, we see that life is like that. Tomorrow will come. Well, let's back up. So this weird thing happens in the movie where Phil Connors wakes up every day. It's the same day. Now, what's he going to do with that day? Now, what do we care? What does it have to do with us? That's not going to happen to us. But the point is, it does. We wake up every day. What are we going to do with that day? What are we going to do with our lives? And so the reason the movie has achieved such stature is that it's something that we realize speaks to us. Ebert says, we see that life is like that. Tomorrow will come. And whether or not it's always February 2nd, it'll always be tomorrow. All we can do about it is be the best person we know how to be. The good news is that we can learn to be better people. Thank you.